Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would respond to something that Jason Robson said. If you guys look, I kind of put it across the screen, and he made a statement about the fact that I'm one of the very few over 40 guys he knows who doesn't have a pec or a shoulder issue from bench pressing, and it says something about my form and my programming over the years. And I think that's something we should talk about, and I'm actually glad that he mentioned that because he is also a very, very strong over 40 lifter who has all his training videos and stuff up. And guy, again, is quite strong, also in my age bracket, and again, a lot of experience himself. And so I thought I would chat with you guys about my 3 basic tips. Now, we don't need to get into things like overuse because that's a programming issue, and overuse injuries and programming very much depends on the individual and where you are at any given time. But I will state that a very, very large number of injuries when lifting heavy don't come from your form at all. They come purely from overuse. They come from overuse injuries and not paying attention to certain signs. But the stuff that we can control with our everyday form and the way that we train, I have 3 basic tips for how I have avoided shoulder and chest issues. Now, some people are going to say, well, these tips aren't conducive to me setting a world record. And I'm like, well, that's fine. If you think that you're capable of setting a world record in the bench press, then go ahead and break your body on that wheel. I mean, I get it. I understand. If that record's that important to you, and I get it, I'm a competitor, then, that's fine. You can get some shoulder surgeries later. You can get some stuff reattached. It's not really a problem, right? It's not the healthiest thing in the world. But I'm going to venture to say that the overwhelming vast majority of people out there listening, and the majority of people who bench press heavy or do any chest press heavy, because these things apply to all chest presses, including dumbbells, that you're not going to be up for a national or a world record, right, at any point in your life. So you should probably follow these 3 rules. Now, what are my 3 basic rules? Number 1, always train inside the rings. And when I say inside the rings, I don't mean, oh yeah, you keep your pointer finger in the rings. I mean your pinky doesn't go past the rings. Those rings on the bar, they are there for certain purposes, for competitive reasons, to keep you within the rules. But if you care about your shoulders, you need to stay inside those rings. Number 2, the bar path needs to be below your nipple line. And again, we come over to dumbbells. If you are lowering dumbbells and your hands, which is where a bar would be, are higher than your nipple line on any sort of flat or decline type angle, that's a problem. You need to stay below the nipple. I don't care what anyone else tells you, what their reasons are, anything else. It is not worth it in terms of the risk of shoulder damage. It's not worth it. Number 3, do not ever train partials. Do not train partials of any type ever for any chest press. You need to do full range of motion, the longest range of motion that you can do with the object you are using. Never ever train partials. Ever. So let's go over to why on each one. Why do we keep our fingers inside the rings, our pinkies inside the rings? And I'm not saying your pinky can't be on the rings. I'm just saying don't exceed it. It just chews your shoulders up. Yes, it lets you reduce the range of motion in many cases. Right? It lets you reduce the range of motion. But the wear and tear on your shoulders over time, guys who bench really wide are the ones who have the most shoulder issues. Guys who bench wide are the ones who have the most shoulder issues. You combine benching wide with not training, say, your rear delts and shoulders and stuff like that, and that's a recipe for disaster. You want to talk about something that knocks more kids out of the game who actually hurt a shoulder in their early 20s just trying to bench press, who aren't even power lifters, like hurting their shoulders with lightweight. I'm talking about guys destroying their shoulders with 225, right? Noob weight, stuff that you should be able to hit after a year in the gym. Guys do it all the time. It's again because they haven't built a base. They don't even have a stable shoulder joint because they already neglect the posterior end of everything. And then what? They bench super wide. It's hard on your shoulders. Every power lifter I know who trained or competed with a really wide grip bench, who is in my age category, has had serious issues. They've had a shoulder scope. They've had to stop bench pressing, all these sorts of problems. All right, that is really, really high on the list. And that's among power lifters. That's among people who actually even train hard. So that's why I included it first. Keep those pinkies inside the rings. I don't care what your motive is. Don't bring them beyond that unless you have a record on the line. Look, if the record for your class is 450 and you got to a 425 bench inside the rings, you can start experimenting, but understand that you may break your body on that wheel. And if it's worth it to you, then by all means, get your record. But to destroy your shoulders for 10 more pounds on a bench press when you do not have a record on the line is ignorant. It's absolutely ignorant. Number 2, bar path needs to stay below the nipple line. In other words, how do we control that? Well, the amount of tuck you have at the bottom. Tucking at the bottom and flaring at the top. Again, has to do with internal rotation of the shoulder. If you want to damage a rotator cuff, you want to hurt your shoulder, do some bar paths where it's above there. Now, dumbbells are one of the worst offenders also. How many guys you see have their pinkies out on a dumbbell? How many guys you see who try to use dumbbells at 90 degrees, right? So that it's almost like a barbell. Instead of pronating their hands and turning them in and forming a triangle with the dumbbells, with the tip at their face, right? That's how you should be dumbbell pressing. And you need, so again, dumbbells are just as bad as a barbell for that. You're trying to avoid that internal rotation of the shoulder. All right, it puts your rotator cuffs and shoulders in a fragile angle. If you go higher than that, we can argue that there's some data that you get more pectoral activation up high with a guillotine type press. There is some data on that, but you know what? If you need more pectoral activation, do an extra set of bench press. Add an incline bench, add a dip, add an extra exercise. Getting caught up in these ideas of this one variation of a lift that's dangerous and destroys your shoulders over time, that is not the best way to gain muscle on the long term. So what if one variation has slightly less muscle activation on an EMG, but you can do it injury-free for 30 years? You guys see the difference? It's totally not worth it. It's absolutely ridiculous. And again, it comes down to what are you trying to get as far as effectiveness from an exercise, or keeping an exercise just being really good, but not getting hurt. And I mean, that one is so simple that it just blows my mind that I even see a few experts argue that, well, you know, the upper is probably not that bad. Probably not that bad. But you do admit there's more risk to it, and there's more risk of chronic inflammation and injury. For what? I mean, it's stuff like that that gives the bench press a bad name. There's a reason a lot of people think the bench press is a dangerous exercise, because of silly shit like that. Super wide, benching above the nipple line. And we come over to the point, they'll try to actually claim that dumbbells might be better, but if you do that with dumbbells, you have the exact same issues you get from a barbell. Will destroy your shoulders over time. Number 3, partials. Now, that one's going to piss some people off. Well, this powerlifter does board presses and that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. Fine. Do you have a world record on the line? Because doing partials is how you tear pectorals. This is how you tear pectorals. Number 1, because if you're not careful, you start doing too many partials. What happens? Your pecs get tighter, you reduce range of motion, you lose mobility. And notice I said mobility, not flexibility. By doing everything through a full range of motion, you train the terminal range of motion at the bottom. And here's the other problem. If you're doing anything but a board press for a partial, you're putting yourself at risk. Because if you beat pins for partials, what happens? It destroys your joints over time. Hitting pins with a barbell will beat your joints up. It's stupid. Don't ever do it. Besides destroying equipment, it destroys your body. It will break your body over time. So if you're doing any sort of lifts hitting pins, you're a moron or you're really young like Strap-on Destiny. And he's going to be feeling that in a decade. He'll pay for it. But he's stupid, and for now he's breaking other kids who are just as stupid as he is. So, if you're doing any sort of partial, and that includes with a dumbbell, to where you're just using air as a gap, you're also risking eventually missing reps. And since you're training so frequently with a partial, you're not training yourself to be strong at the bottom. You don't have as good a mobility. So when the weight finally does come down accidentally and you miss a lift, you're at a higher risk of injury. In fact, I'd say more pec tears happen with dumbbells, in my experience, than with the barbell, other than at really heavy weights. For that reason, because of the partial movement a lot of people are doing. The angles they're putting themselves at. And then when the dumbbells destabilize at the bottom and you stretch too far, it rips your pec off the bone. But this is also how Junkie Ward tore his chest. He couldn't even do a complete range of motion because he trained too many partials, his chest got tight, and he ended up tearing a pec. Here's your solution. If you want the benefits of a heavier lockout, this whole video I've been training with chains and bands. A lot of it's speed work, some of it's heavier work. That gives you all the benefits you would ever want from a heavier lockout. But you're still training the bottom with a heavy weight too. You maintain your mobility of the pectoral while still getting the benefits of a different strength curve. With the invention of chains and bands, there's no reason for anyone to ever do a partial. Partials get you hurt. And anyone who claims, oh, well, we do this only go to 90 degrees and they have you benching into the air instead of on a board, that person's an idiot and they are going to hurt you. That person is not going to be benching heavy at my age, even if they have some sort of advanced degree in exercise science. They're not going to be training like I do when they're over 40. I can assure you of that. So let's keep that in mind. So those are the 3 rules, guys. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.